Hello, I'm Lola Stone and this is Handmade Originals. I'm sure there will come a time when I'll stop doing this, but I haven't reached it yet. Anyway, as you may recall from an earlier video, my niece is getting married in August and she came up with a rather lovely idea that different members of the family are making different layers of her 5-tier cake. One of her colleagues from work has very kindly volunteered to ice it all for her, and I have volunteered to make sugar-crafted flowers to decorate it. Now, as it's a 5-tier cake and I've never actually put sugar-crafted flowers on a wedding cake before, I'm torn between being really excited about it and being really nervous about it, because I want it to be perfect and I don't want to make any mistakes. So in order that I can work out exactly where the flowers are going, I have made a dummy cake, which is roughly the measurements of her cake. So I've just made it from bits of cardboard, as you can see, but I've also, if I can turn this round, covered in white paper so that you get the idea of what the icing will look like. And I'm just about to do the final top cake. There's no magic to this, I'm sure everyone knows how to do it. You just measure the depth of your cake, fold it down and then snip down to where the fold is. And obviously for the smaller the cake, the steeper the curve, so therefore the closer together you need to make the cuts, otherwise you're going to end up with a series of straight lines, and you want to try to avoid that if you want it to look like a nice circular cake. So I'm just going to sellotape that down quickly, and I'm going to just put a little bit of sellotape on top to hold these little bits down, although actually I don't think I need to, because I've cut a circle which will just go down like that. So let me just quickly put this down. As I say, this is a dummy, so it doesn't really matter if the sellotape is showing its transparent tape. It's just to give me an idea of the positioning of the flowers. I should say I live in London and my niece lives in Hampshire, which is some significant way away. So the cake is going to be iced in Hampshire. I'm going to take the decorations down and we're going to put it all together either the night before or the morning of the wedding. So I need to be pretty sure about where the different sugar-crafted flowers are going to go. And to give myself an idea, the sort of thing she wants is something cascading down from about here to about there. A complete cascade, so flowers on the top and then all the way down. So more actually on the side of the cake than on the top, and all the way down to here. And she wants them smaller flowers here coming down to larger flowers here. And their colour scheme is white and midnight blue. So I have made all of the flowers, which are here. The larger ones are at the front and the smaller ones are at the back. I've tried to arrange. Now, as you can see, they're all different shades of blue, so I don't want it to be patchy. I want to just have all sorts of just different colours blending into each other. So starting with the bigger ones at the bottom, I put some tape on to tie them together. So I thought maybe this one here and then another one perhaps just a little bit up on the cake, and maybe a smaller one here to start with. So I'm going to start at the bottom and then work up. The scary thing is actually just getting started, and I've been putting this off and putting it off, not because I'm frightened of doing it, I'm really excited to do it, but because I'm just so nervous about getting it right. And you can procrastinate and procrastinate, but actually the solution to procrastination is action, and it doesn't really matter what action you take, you just need to take some action, and once you get started then you're off. So I'm going to get busy trying to put some of these together, and then I'll come back to you and show you how I've got on. Hello, I'm back. I'm at a bit of a funny old height because for the last section I raised the table by standing it on boxes and tins, and I'm now sitting on 3 cushions to keep up. So if I suddenly go bleh, sideways, it's an experiment that hasn't worked. I've got on pretty well with the flowers. I'm just going to show you a photograph I took on my iPhone, which is a bit of a cheat, but I haven't got room on the table for everything. So if you can see there, So I've got down to sort of pretty much the last tier, and when I got down to the last tier, I realised that that's where I'd actually started making the roses. And if I can just show you these roses, these were the first ones that I made. So the petals are quite thick and a bit lumpy, and they're a bit chunky and very heavy. They say that practice makes perfect. Well, it didn't make me perfect, but mine got a lot better than these. So when I got down to the bottom layer where these were supposed to sit, I thought actually they won't do. So what I'm going to do is make 3 more for the very bottom, some of which will just sit in front of the cake. And I'm going to take this opportunity to show you how I actually made the roses later on when I got quite proficient at it. The first thing that I realised was that these roses, made with the icing centres, are incredibly heavy and very difficult to position because of that, because they're very easy to drop, which I've done several times, which is why you can probably see a few little mended cracks on that one. It's a wedding, you don't want mended roses in the sugar-crafted flowers on the cake, you want perfect flowers. So I've laid those to one side. They can be my plan B if this all goes pear-shaped. And I was going to buy some of the polystyrene little buds which come ready wired, but the size that I wanted was out of stock, which was really annoying, and I am not a patient person. When I want to do something, I like to just get it done. So I thought, my eyes are lighted on this expandable foam lump that I had left over, and I thought I can make my own. So that's what I did. So with all the ones I did later, they've actually all got these sort of expandable foam centres, which are incredibly light, which makes the whole thing obviously lighter and therefore easier to handle. So the way I did this was, I'll just make another one here. They're ever so easy and quick to make. Use this bit. So cutting towards the table, which is not something I always do, but I'm trying to train myself to do it. So if you just start with a point, basically, and cut down. You can cut down sort of like a square-based pyramid, and then just sort of round the bottom off a little bit. You don't have to be too perfect about this, because the good thing about this stuff, and with the polystyrene ones as well, though because they're perfectly shaped you don't need to do it, you can just squidge it, look, like that, and sort of mould it into the shape that you want. And then get yourself, I've been using these wires which I cut off from the long stems of the roses I've wired already. So with these little bits that are left over, if you, let me just show you, if you just stick it in like that, you've got a bud on a wire, but it will swivel. So what you actually need to do is make it into a plane rather than a point. Just take the tip like that. I don't know if you can see. What am I wearing that's white? Here. I'm wearing bubble wrap. Take the tip and just turn it over like that, so it looks a bit like a shepherd's crook. You can see that. I'll take my bib away. Right, and then put a blob of glue on there, just to get in too much, just a blob. And always leave your glue standing upright, obviously, because otherwise they always drip everywhere. So it's so difficult to come out, and the minute it does come out, it just goes everywhere. And there we are. It's not perfect, it doesn't have to be, it just has to give me a rough shape. And I'm going to stick that there. I'm going to do one more, and then I'm going to show you how I ice them. So I have shown you how to make these little polystyrene buds, and I'm now going to show you how to make the roses, or how I make the roses. There are many ways to do this, and if you look on YouTube you'll find loads of little videos of people doing very excellent jobs of making roses. This is just the way I do it, I hasten to add. Now, when I came back to my sugar paste icing, I clearly hadn't wrapped it up terribly well, because it's as hard as a rock, look. and you just can't make any headway trying to manipulate that at all. So I also discovered, when I came back to my various bits and pieces, that I had these leaves which I made to go with the rose at the outset, and unfortunately they got a little bit damp. And let me just show you what's happened to them. You can see where they've got damp, they've actually become really soft because the sugar paste has just absorbed the water and it's become really soft again. So this is my plan. Do not throw away rock hard sugar paste icing. What I've done is I've sliced it, I can show you this, into very thin slices with a very sharp knife, and I've placed it on 2 sheets of kitchen towel which I have soaked with water. And my theory, or my working theory being that the sugar paste icing will, yes, absorb the water and therefore, like the leaves, become more malleable. You can see this is the dry side. Can you see there? And it's much darker on the other side where it's already absorbed some of the water. So I'm just turning it over. I'll probably end up being far too soggy and being a bit of a mess, but you'll also see I've got 3 different colours here because I thought it would be easier to see on video if I put together 3 completely different colours, and then you can see how the layers fit in together. So I'm going to try with the dark one first. Incidentally, you'll notice I'm wearing an apron. Absolutely wear an apron when you're working with coloured sugar paste because, as you can see from my hands, the dye is so strong. If you accidentally touch anything you're wearing, this dye will come off onto your clothes, and who knows how difficult it will be to get off. So this is actually, I can mould it with my hand, and I'm actually just kneading it like dough. It's a little bit dry in the middle still, which is why you've got that sort of consistency. So I'm going to put that back down, but it is absorbing the water. So I'm going to leave that for a little while and then come back to it, and then I'll show you how I make the roses. Now I'm going to show you how I make sugar paste flowers or sugar paste roses. An emphasis on the eye, because there are lots of different videos online which you can look at, which will show you how other people do it. Now, let me just show you the equipment I've got first. Well, first of all, I've got my prepared little bud on a stick. I've got 5 teaspoons, and I will explain the need for those later. I've got one of these little, I don't know what you call that, a sort of roly thing. It comes with lots of sugar crafting flower kits, but anyway, this one with the ball, the balling tool. I did actually try to make one for myself, which is a marble stuck on a chopstick, but actually I think this one is better. I've got some white fat in case my icing dries out and is a little bit sticky. This is my glass chopping board, and here I know people have special mats, but I've just got a sort of washing up sponge in a plastic sandwich bag, and I've also got some corn flour. Now, when I first started making these, I put icing sugar on the mat to stop it from sticking, but actually icing sugar is not great because if your hands get too hot, it gets very sticky. So I am also using corn flour there. And it's a good idea to just kind of smooth it out like that, because if you get any lumps, the lumps will stick to your sugar paste. I've also got here some egg white, which is my glue, and my trusty old horrible old brush. Right, now to start with, I don't use a template or anything like that. I literally just pinch off a piece of the darkest colour, and I tend to work with 3 or 4 colours, so I work from darkest in the middle to medium to light. And then my first one is the funniest shape one, I guess. I don't really bother about making this petal shaped at all. I'm going to just take a little pat of my white fat and put it there so I don't end up taking too much. And really it's just this edge here I'm concerned about, because when you're talking about the innermost petal, it's only that top edge that you actually see, and I want to try and get that nice and thin. Don't mind if it's a little bit curly, and quite long, because I want it to be a nice spiral shape. Now, as you can see, that's not really a petal shape at all, but that's fine for these purposes. So I'm going to put a little bit of nice egg white down the side, and then this is my polystyrene bud which I've already made. I'm going to put this on about halfway down. I'm not even concerned about covering the whole of the bud. What I'm actually concerned about here is this tiny little bit in the middle, which I want to make into a really neat, tight spiral, because that's all you'll see of this petal when you look down on it. I don't know if you can see there. I think that's a nice neat petal. So as I say, look at the rest of this, which is a bit of a lumpy old bumpy old mess. That doesn't matter, we're not going to see that. Moving swiftly on, next one. So again, take a pinch. You don't need too much because you're going to roll it out quite thin, and again it's only the top edge that you're interested in at this stage, because these innermost petals you just don't really see other than on the very topmost part. Well, if you want to make a frill in your petal, which I think looks quite pretty, the way to do it is literally just roll the top edge more than the rest of it, and then you're stretching this edge here and keeping this bit stable. And obviously if you stretch one edge, you see, then you get these sort of little flare bits. Let's put a bit of icing, a bit of egg white on that. Now when you're attaching your next petal, indeed all of the subsequent petals, where you've got a crease here or a join, that's the bit that you cover over, rather like when you're, as you do, when you're bricklaying. When you're having a line of bricks, you always put one brick over the join of the two previous bricks on the row below. Well, that's what I always do when I'm laying bricks anyway. So there we are. I'm trying to make this sort of really neat around the middle here, tight, and I'm also just turning that little bit out of it. Now I don't like using templates because I don't like it to be completely uniform, because roses are natural, as we all know. They're not made by machines, and I think it is our lack of uniformity and our differences which make us interesting and beautiful. And I say our because I think that's true of everything in nature, mankind included. If we were all identical, how boring the world would be. That's our next one. And you gradually just build it up. Again, you see there's the join between the edges of that petal, so I'm going to just put this one here and just want it up at about the same height, and I'm going to just start it to fold back a little bit, just curl it, that's it, just to give it a bit of interest, as if it's inviting you to peer down inside it. Now I'm going to go to my next colour, and I think that's a bit, if I can show you, that's a bit close to that colour. So what I'm going to do is pinch off a bit of the white and mix it up into that. I'll come back to you when I've done it. Here we are, I've mixed the two colours together and I now have a uniform intermediate colour. In actual fact, because you're making your own roses, or any flowers at all, you can really make them any colour you like. I mean, you could make them purple, you could make them green, you could make them sky blue ginger. A lot of people prefer things to be natural colours, and I have to say I'm probably in that camp, although I have to say I'm rather surprised by how pretty these roses, these blue roses, are looking. Sometimes you make something and you sort of surprise yourself with how lovely it is, the way it comes out. Indeed, Michelangelo used to say when he was sculpting, whoops, let's look at this here, going across the join of the previous petals. Michelangelo used to say when he was sculpting figures that he didn't actually sculpt the figure, but he simply released the figure from the stone, and I think that's rather a lovely idea, and I quite like the idea of just releasing these roses from the sugar paste, and each one takes on its own unique form and is surprising in its own way. I'm going to carry on with this, and then I'm going to show you a final technique when I get to the last few petals. Now, if I wanted to, I could have made these petals a bit bigger, covered the base of my bud, and I could have that now as a bud if I covered the bottom part with little bits of green as sepals. But I'm going to carry on and make this as a full-blown rose, and I'm going to show you the next step, what you do when you've got it to this rather lovely shape, but you actually, the next round of petals you want to stand out a little bit more, because when you've got soft icing like this, it's very, very floppy once you've rolled it out because it's quite thin. So what you need to do is, with your next ones, you make cunning use of these teaspoons, which is your secret weapon when making weapons. So here we are, I'm just going to roll this out. My nice slightly frilly edge. If it starts to stick at all, you put more corn flour underneath, and if it's sticking to your balling tool, put a little bit of white fat on that, and that will stop it from sticking. You can see I've made that a bit more petal shaped, and I've also frilled the edge ever so slightly, and I'm just going to turn it back marginally here, just a little bit of a thing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it over my spoon, and I'm going to push that bit down. Can you see? Show this up to show you, so that it's literally just hanging over, hold this here so it doesn't fall off, hanging over the edge of the spoon, and that way you get that nice curved shape. Whoops! If you don't drop it. At this stage it doesn't matter, it's not brittle until it's dry. Right, I'm going to carry on making more of these. I'm going to make 5 of them, and then I'll show you how I attach these. So you can see I've made my 5 petals, which I've hardened off a little bit. I can show you this one, which I did first of all. You can see it's retaining its shape a little bit more, which means that when I put some egg white on it, it will still be slightly flexible, but it won't be as floppy as it would have been if I hadn't dried it at all. So I'm just going to put a little bit of egg white on the bottom here, not all the way up, otherwise it will stick all the way up and you'll end up with a trumpet shaped rose, which will look more like a tulip. And I'm just going to add that like that. Again, I can just, it's still slightly flexible, so I can just flex it back a little bit like that. Now I'm going to carry on attaching these 4, and then I will show you where we've got to. So I'm just onto my 5th petal now, 5th and final petal. So I'm just going to put a little bit of icing sugar on here, and I want to show you this because it is a bit fiddly, and really you just have to kind of go with it. So that's that. Now never line them up like that, because then it'll start to look more like a camellia than a rose. Always offset the petals like that. It looks so much prettier. Now these ones, you can see I have made the colour differences quite obvious, and the reason I've done this is to make it easier for you to see how I've attached the petals. If I were making this on an actual cake, I would have made the colours closer to each other. Of course you can make the colours any colour you like, but I prefer to have them slightly natural looking. Now when I've got them like this, I'm holding it in my hand like an ice cream cone, because my thumb and my finger are kind of holding the petals in place. And what I'm going to do is I'm just getting random bits of foam, and in fact you can use anything for this, and I'm just going to pop these in between the petals so that I'm going to dry it upside down, and the weight of the petals will hold these little bits in place, and the little bits will hold the petals separate from each other, so that hopefully we'll end up with a really beautifully shaped rose. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing. So can you see I've just put them in between the petals, so that when I tip it upside down, I'm just going to separate these two a little bit here as well. Finger's quite big for this job, so use the other end of this balling tool and you can get right in there. Separate that out a little bit. And just put a bit under there. Like that. Now, hey presto, upside down. Oops, not that bit. I'm going to put that bit back in. And the weight of that petal will hold it, if you can see, like that. I'm going to dry that upside down, and then when it's dry they will be completely rigid and won't move. It's always worth checking when they're halfway through drying, just to make sure what the situation is, and then if anything's gone a bit loony, you can change it. This one is not quite dry but nearly, and you can see that you can just still move the petals about, so it's always worth keeping an eye on them. Again, the colours here I've used are quite distinct from each other so that you can see how I've attached the different petals. And in fact with this one I'm going to quickly just show you how to add the green tape. Now, whenever don't actually do this until the rose is dry, but whenever you're handling dry roses, they are really, really brittle. So my top tip for you, having broken so many of them myself, and here is my latest tragic victim, I dropped it before I started filming and I've just chipped all of these petals here. So my top tip to you, which I should have followed myself, is whenever you're picking up dry roses, which are very brittle indeed, always put down lots of bubble wrap and make it kind of bouncy like that so that it absorbs. So if I then, I'll pick up this dry one, if I then drop this one, the softness of the bubble wrap will absorb all the impact from the rose and it won't chip. So whenever you're doing anything involving the brittle dry roses, always make sure that you have bubble wrap in front of you. Now this rose is almost dry, so I'm just going to show you how to do this, which is really, really easy. You literally, this is florist tape, and when you stretch it, it becomes quite sticky. So literally just, what I tend to do is I leave an extra little bit there, which to me looks quite pretty as a sepal, but if you don't, you can just sort of wind it in and then you just spin it. I guess if you're left-handed you would probably do this the other way, but I do it that way. And then as you spin it at an angle and it will wind its way, pull it at the same time, spin, pull, twist, and then you can literally just push it up so that it's tight underneath the flower. If you wanted to make this into a sepal, you would obviously have to cut different small petal shapes to make it look like a sepal, or you could use sugar paste, colour it green and make a sepal out of that. But because on a cake, when they're tight to the cake, you won't actually see behind the roses, I don't bother putting sepals in. And then when you want to, I'm just going to tear this piece off. When you want to join these roses together, I've got another one here, I'm going to just put that one there. Now, bend them at an odd shape away from each other, because otherwise they will clatter while you're spinning them and then they'll break each other. So just literally, this is brilliant stuff, this tape. You literally just keep going round and round and round, spin them together like that. That will be sufficient, and then what you can do is bend them into any shape you like. The best way I find to manipulate these roses once you've pinned them to tape them together is to just get some pointy pliers like this, and you can literally just pinch just underneath the rose and you can manipulate them really carefully and accurately like that, and then you can put another one in there. You wouldn't use a broken one obviously, and that's how I made my little bunches. Hello. In the last part of the video, I think I was busy showing you about how to make the polystyrene centres, the little teardrop shapes to make the centre of the roses, because I was unhappy that particularly the big roses, which were going to go at the bottom of the cake, are just so heavy, and they're top heavy, so they tend to do that, and then you drop them. as is evidenced by these very large cracks on the back of this one, which I've just dropped umpteen times. You will recall I was going to make replacement roses for particularly these big ones, which I wasn't happy with, and I'm pleased to say that I've now done that. Let me show you the replacement roses, which I'm much happier with. I think they're much better, and that's these ones here. If you can see, I've wired them from the back there, and I've now collected them into bunches ready to go in the flower picks, and I've also inserted these crystals here, which are actually florist's crystals, and I found a little bag I had which was given to me years ago by a friend, thank you very much Naomi, and I just thought actually they would be perfect because my niece wants a little bit of bling on her cake, and I didn't want it to be too much, because there's a fine line between lovely and sparkly and a bit over the top and too much. So I think this is just about the right balance, and what I've done here is I've used the ordinary wires, covered them in florist tape, then just dipped them in glue and then into a little bit of glitter, and then put them inside the florist crystals, so that if you look at them closely you can see there's a little bit of silvery sparkle inside the crystal, and that should make it sparkle a little bit more when the light hits it. And I've bunched them in groups of 1, 3 and 5 because odd numbers always look more attractive to the eye rather than even numbers for some reason. Anyway, so that's the clump, if I can put it, or the mini bouquet, which is going to go at the bottom of the cake. I have done the crystals, I've tied all the bunches together, I've replaced the ones I was unhappy with, and now the last thing I've got to do, which I've sort of been putting off a bit because I'm really terrified I'm going to break them while I do it, the last thing I've got to do is to glue these little bunches, the mini bouquets, into these picks, which is what's going to be used to insert them into the cake. So this is the little bouquet that goes on the top of the cake, and you can see that what I've done is I've just wrapped around the roses where they touch each other with a little bit of bubble wrap, which will of course be removed, and the reason I've done that is because these are now quite hard. See, I can tap it with my nail, and where they touch each other, if you're moving them they will clatter, and there is a risk that they might break each other. So I'm just putting a little bit of padding around them just to cushion them against each other before. See, that's going to go in there, and I'm going to glue it in with hot glue. Now, the thing to remember here is you must not fill the whole thing up with hot glue, because rather like Archimedes, you will discover that the water in his bath and the glue in this pick get displaced by the body that you put in it. So you have to put in just sufficient to go round and to fill up, but not to overflow, and of course you don't want to underfill it either. So I have my hot glue gun here ready and waiting. I'm going to fill it up. Okay, let's give it a go. The other thing is, of course, this is going to be really hot if it overspills, and I don't really want boiling hot glue on my fingers. Feel the pick getting hot at the bottom. Let's try that. Hold it always from underneath, don't push on the petals. Now, I'm going to use these chopsticks just to get in there. Push it down, 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 yes. And that is as far as it will go while it sets. And hot glue actually sets really quickly, so you do have to check it beforehand to make sure, before you put the hot glue in, just test it into the dry pick, you know what I'm talking about, so that the length of your little bouquet isn't too long to go in the pick, because if it is, it's going to be standing proud at the top and it just won't sit flat to the cake. Right, so that is, I'm just going to pop that there to dry. There we are, and that is roughly, I don't know if you can see that, how that's going to sit on the cake. While I am waiting for the glue to dry, you'll notice I've put this brown, I don't know if you can see, this brown paper on the top here. That's baking paper, and the reason I've done that is because I'm not, after all, going to be putting this together myself. My niece and her fiance are going to do it. Bravo, the two of them. and they are going to do it, I think, the night before or possibly 2 nights before. Now, my only concern about that is these flowers have got an awful lot of dye in them, and with sugar paste, if it gets at all damp and it's next to white icing, that the colour from the roses could leach into the white cake, which means that they will then not have a white wedding cake but a sort of white wedding cake with blue splodges on it. So in order to avoid that, what I'm suggesting to the two of them is that they put baking paper between the flowers and the cake to provide a shield for the cake. And I haven't made this into a complete circular dish because you'll have to tear it to get it out of the way. So what I've actually done here is to create 2 overlapping halves like this, so that when they're ready on the wedding day to actually have the cake revealed in all its hopeful glory, you simply just pick each edge up and ta-da, separate them one from the other. So if I can just show you, it's actually like that with 2 overlapping parts, because you really don't want any part of the coloured flowers to be touching the white of the cake. The other thing I will suggest to them, and I suggest this to you as well, is that particularly with the fruit cakes which are on the bottom, which are quite solid, you might find it's quite difficult to get the pick in. So before you pick up your flowers or touch them, which are very brittle and delicate, get an empty pick and use that to push into the cake and make the hole ready for the flower filled pick to go in easily, because you've already made a hole for it to go into. The other thing is, of course, when you do put the pick in, make sure you put it in at an angle like that, because if you can imagine it as a seesaw like this, when this is in the cake like that, on the one side you've got, on the one side of the seesaw, you've got the weight of the flowers, and they are quite heavy when you've got several of them together like these. On the other side you've got the weight of the cake. When you've got the fruit cakes, you've got all these cakes on top, so you've got quite a good weight holding it down. But when particularly you've got the sponge cake on the top, which is quite light inside as well, you need to make sure that is really down at as much of an angle as you can get it, so that you've got as much of the cake sitting on top on this side of the seesaw as that side, and because this is your little pivot here. The other thing is that if you find that the cake, the flowers are either drooping or moving, not in the right place or whatever, or you're a bit nervous that they're heavy compared to the weight of the cake, the thing to do, take your trusty toothpick, and for example, if this was your rose and it was drooping like it would be from here, then just put your toothpick in the cake there and just put it underneath the rose. Although preferably, I don't really want to pick these up and demonstrate on these, put it against one of the wires to lift it up, so you've got a bit more scaffolding, if you like, into the cake to hold the flowers up. And I think that's all I need to tell you. Hello and welcome back to Handmade Originals. As you can see, another dress, another day, and the cake, ta-da, is very nearly finished. I'm so thrilled with it. And there it was gone. I'm afraid I ran out of film, but do not worry. I've actually put at the end of this video several close-ups of the Sugarcrafted flowers, and I've also put in one final photograph of the actual cake as it appeared at the reception, and it was slightly different to what was originally intended, but absolutely charming and delightful. So at the end of each project, what I quite like to do is to just reflect on what happened in that project and think about what I might have done differently. And the first thing that I thought was that with the cardboard cake model which I made, it caused quite a few problems for me, in that when I put the flower picks in like this, because there was nothing of substance behind the cardboard, they sort of waggled about a bit like that, and I actually lost quite a few flowers where they sort of went like that. The flowers fell out because I hadn't glued them in at that stage, and they just tipped on the floor and broke. So I thought it would be better to use one of these polystyrene cakes, but actually I'm now revising that opinion because this is so dense it's actually quite difficult to push these in. I suppose what you could do is push a hole in with the pick first, but I think further reflection that what might work better is actually to make the cardboard cakes as I did, but then get the good old expandable foam like that and fill each one of my cardboard cakes with that, because the expandable foam is not as dense as this polystyrene and so therefore would be easier to push things in. So that's that. The other thing which I should have used, which would have saved me an awful lot of breakages, which I did mention when I started doing the video on how to make flowers, is good old bubble wrap, because as demonstrated you can, this is the rose that's already broken, you can drop things on bubble wrap and it just absorbs the impact of the rose and doesn't let it chip any more of its petals. So that would have saved me an awful lot of broken roses. The other thing about bubble wrap, which is really useful, is if you are making your roses in advance, or in any event if you're transporting them in any way, it's really useful for packing them. So you can put the roses like this and then literally pack around them and just make sure that the petals are supported. And additionally, what I did, because I was sending the rose, I made my roses quite a long time in advance, and then I had to package them up, and then I was sending them down to Hampshire to my niece. So the other thing I did was to package the roses up with these little silica gel packets. You get these whenever you buy something online and you get it sent to you, if it's clothing or such like. They usually put a couple of these in the box with your clothing, so just keep them because they're really useful, and what they do is they absorb any moisture that gets in, so it stops the roses from going soft in case any moisture gets in. So that's my other top tip, keep your little silica gel packets. The other thing I would say is, I've touched on it already, just make sure you give yourself enough time to make all the roses or flowers up, because they are quite labour intensive. Not quite so labour intensive if you don't make your own polystyrene buds. You can buy those to save time, but it's quite difficult, apart from where you line the petals up on spoons, to get a production line going, because if you do too many petals in advance they dry out and then you can't manipulate them at all around your roses. So do make sure that you allow yourself enough time to make all the roses that you want, and do make sure you have enough time to do it without putting yourself under time pressure so that you feel as if it's a job, because unless it is your job and you're a professional, really if you're doing it for a member of the family it should be a labour of love, in which case you kind of enjoy doing it, you put love and affection into it if you like while you're doing it. What I used to do was I'd do about 2 hours a day on them, and then leave it, because after that I was starting to get a bit fed up and I didn't want to be making roses for my niece's wedding cake reluctantly, thinking, oh, this is becoming a bit tedious. So I would leave it until the next day and then come back to it fresh, and then I'd feel sort of full of warm and fuzzy feelings about her and the wedding and how lovely it was going to be. And just touching on that, my niece actually was a very, very clever girl, because in asking various members of the family to make different tiers of the cake, and having a colleague at work ice it for her, and having her aunt, me, do these sugar-crafted flowers, we all felt involved in this union of two people, and it was just really, really lovely. I don't know if it was just me, but I just felt that she managed to somehow move it away from that sort of bridezilla perfectionists trying to make things as if it's a corporate function, to a real coming together of two families to celebrate the union of two people in love with each other, and it was just lovely. So if I could pass on any message to future brides, it would be this: have a think about the route my niece took and get your families involved in your wedding so that they're actually participants and supporters rather than just visitors or attendees who turn up and find their name place and eat the food and then go. Because it makes such a difference to the atmosphere. And I have to tell you, the wedding itself was just Truly wonderful.